Picture colonial history for a second. You're probably imagining massive, state-funded armies marching across borders, right? Well, in this explainer, we're diving into a reality that is far more complex and, frankly, a lot more terrifying. India wasn't originally conquered by a nation's military. No, it was actually enslaved by a private corporation, a company founded by just a handful of merchants. This is the wild story of a group that literally turned the scales of trade into swords and completely altered the course of global history.
So, the spark for this massive conquest? It wasn't some grand royal decree for war. It was actually a sudden spike in the price of black pepper in September 1599. Back then, spices, especially black pepper, which they called black gold, were absolutely crucial in Europe for preserving and flavoring meat. But foreign merchants held the monopoly and were just arbitrarily jacking up the prices. British traders were furious. So imagine this. On a freezing cold London night, 24 wealthy merchants gather in a dark room. Fueled by anger and the promise of ridiculous wealth, they form a syndicate. They pulled together 125 partners and a massive pile of initial capital. Sure, they knew the oceans were deadly, packed with pirates and massive storms, but the glittering wealth of India? That was a prize way bigger than any of their fears.
To actually pull this off, though, they needed unprecedented power. So on December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted the syndicate a royal charter. But listen, this was not your standard run-of-the-mill business license. It was essentially a magic charter. It gave them a 15-year monopoly on trade across a massive maritime region. That meant literally no other British citizen could compete there. But even crazier, the Crown gave this private company state-like powers. The East India Company could mint its own coins, write its own laws, run its own courts, issue punishments, and, most importantly, maintain its own private army. It was a piece of paper that literally transformed everyday merchants into absolute kings.
Now, their original target was actually the Spice Islands over in Indonesia. But after getting into some really bloody conflicts with foreign powers who were already there, they pivoted to Mughal India. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins shows up in Surat. He knows he has to impress the powerful Mughal Emperor Jahangir, so he goes all out. He dresses up in Afghan noble attire and even speaks to the emperor in Turkish. Jahangir was, mildly impressed, but the real trade rights didn't happen until 1615. That's when Sir Thomas Roe, this brilliant diplomat, spent 3 whole years at the court just handing out lavish European gifts to finally secure a royal decree. And because they realized they couldn't just conquer the mainland head-on, the company started spinning this spiderweb of coastal settlements. In 1639, they leased land in Madras, immediately built a fort, and set up a white city where Indians were strictly banned. Then, in 1668, they got their hands on Bombay for a super cheap annual rent. Why? Because the city was actually given to the English king as a dowry from a Portuguese princess.
To completely infiltrate the subcontinent, the company used this highly deceptive 4-step playbook. Step 1. Act humble. Just ask for basic trade rights and permission to build some simple warehouses for your goods. The local kings totally bought it. They assumed these guys were just acting as watchmen over their inventory. But then came step 3. Suddenly, those innocent little warehouses transformed into heavily fortified military bases. And by step 4, the mask was off. They weren't merchants anymore, they were predators. They just sat back, patiently waiting for the mighty Mughal Empire to weaken, fully ready to exploit any internal division and completely overthrow the very local rulers who had originally welcomed them in.
12%. I really want you to think about that number. That 12% represents the Bengal province's share of total global production at the time. Bengal was an absolute gold mine. We're talking incredibly fertile soil and these legendary weavers making world-famous Dhaka muslin and silk. So, for the East India Company, Bengal wasn't just another market. It was the ultimate prize, the kind of prize that could fund their entire global operation. They started securing their foothold there by bribing local nawabs and sending all these lavish gifts to the Mughal court in Delhi, basically corrupting the whole system right from the inside out.
The real turning point, though, hit with the 1717 royal decree. The Mughal Emperor Farrukhsir was suffering from this severe illness, right? Well, an East India Company doctor actually manages to cure him. The emperor is so grateful that he grants the company a decree allowing them to trade in Bengal completely tax-free. And that was pretty much the death knell for local Indian merchants. Think about it, the native traders still had to pay heavy taxes, but this massive foreign company paid absolutely nothing. That insane unfair advantage meant the East India Company was building grand palaces, while the local merchants were literally driven into starvation and ruin.
You really see the sheer audacity of their strategy in the 1757 Battle of Plassey. The young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, realized the company was acting like a parasite, so he attacks their fort in Calcutta. The company's response? They send in Robert Clive. Now, Clive looks at the situation and knows his 3,000 soldiers stand zero chance against the Nawab's massive army in a fair fight. So he doesn't fight fair. He relies on treacherous bribery. He secretly promises to make the Nawab's own commander, Mir Jafar, the new ruler if he just betrays his leader. And it worked. During the battle, Mir Jafar's massive forces just stood there. Plus, a sudden rainstorm completely ruined the Nawab's exposed gunpowder, while the British had cleverly kept theirs covered. The Nawab had to flee, was later killed, and boom, the company became the true kingmakers of Bengal.
This relentless power grab finally peaked after the 1764 Battle of Buxar. The company's highly disciplined forces defeated a massive Indian alliance, basically proving that no military power could stop them. Then, in 1765, Robert Clive actually forced the Mughal emperor to sign over the Diwani rights. Overnight, this private trading company officially became the tax collectors for Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. They set up this twisted dual government system. The company held all the money and all the real power, while a puppet Nawab held all the administrative responsibility, but with zero funds. The company was literally using Indian tax money to buy Indian goods and then exporting them for massive, entirely risk-free profits.
The human cost of all this boundless greed is captured in one staggering figure: 10 million. That is the estimated number of people who died during the horrific Bengal famine of 1770. People were literally reduced to skeletons on the streets. And yet, instead of showing mercy or, providing relief, the East India Company hoarded grain. To protect their bottom line and make sure their profits didn't dip, they actually raised the tax rates on a starving population. The immense wealth they extracted during this dark period was funneled directly back to Britain, jump-starting their modern industrial revolution while pushing India deeper into starvation.
From there, the company ruthlessly expanded its grip across the rest of the subcontinent. Down south, they ran into fierce resistance from Tipu Sultan. This guy was a modern warrior. He even used advanced Agni-Baण rockets that caused absolute chaos in the British ranks. But by forming alliances with his rivals, the company managed to defeat and kill him in 1799, plundering his immense wealth. Next, they targeted the Maratha Empire. They systematically injected poison into their internal politics, exploiting every division until the Marathas finally fell in 1818. And then they introduced something called the Doctrine of Lapse in 1848. It was this highly unjust legal fiction that said if an Indian ruler died without a biological son, their sovereign state was automatically annexed by the company. It was legalized robbery, and it swallowed up massive states like Jhansi and Awadh. Eventually, decades of this systemic exploitation, the crushing taxes, and the blatant land theft pushed the populace right to the breaking point. The spark that lit the powder keg? The controversial use of cow and pig fat in new rifle cartridges, which deeply offended the religious sentiments of both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. A soldier named Mangal Pandey sparked the massive 1857 uprising. It was incredible how they organized it, coordinating in secret, passing messages from village to village using chapatis and red lotuses. Leaders like Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi famously rode into battle against the British with her child tied to her back. Now, the revolution was ultimately violently suppressed, but it shook the East India Company to its absolute core. It became undeniably clear that a private corporation could no longer manage a hostile subcontinent. The British Crown had to step in, strip the company of its power, and take direct control of India in 1858.
The ultimate, devastating economic cost of this whole era is almost too big to comprehend. When the Crown took over, the outright plundering didn't stop, it just became institutionalized. Based on historical data, economists estimate that between 1765 and 1945, the British systematically drained approximately $45 trillion of wealth from India. $45 trillion! This wasn't just trade, it was a highly organized wealth transfer. The British used the tax revenues paid by Indians to buy Indian-made goods and then ship those goods to Europe. That $45 trillion drain, that is the very foundation upon which much of the modern, prosperous Western economy was built, leaving incredibly profound scars on the subcontinent.
But get this, there is an incredible, almost poetic irony to how this story ends today. The East India Company, the very same corporate entity that ruthlessly conquered a massive subcontinent, overthrew emperors and enslaved a nation for roughly 200 years, still technically exists. But in 2005, the remnants of this historic behemoth were actually purchased by an Indian entrepreneur. Today, the company that once commanded massive private armies and drained trillions of dollars, well, they just sell luxury tea and fine foods. Talk about a stunning reversal of fortune. To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought.
History isn't just a collection of dates and old, dusty battles. It's a mirror reflecting human nature and our societal vulnerabilities. We've literally just seen how a mere 24 merchants used a highly organized corporate structure to exploit internal divisions, greed, and a lack of unity among local rulers to conquer an entire civilization. Given that shiny modern economies were built on this historic extraction, what lessons must we learn today? How vital is our own vigilance, our self-respect, and our unity in protecting our future from those who might seek to divide and exploit us? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the history of the world's most dangerous corporation.